The other night, I was using an app on my phone to look at the stars, and just so happened to catch the Hubble telescope gliding across the sky in near-Earth orbit, following what we now know as a geodesic through curved space-time. Think about the work that went into the supply chain, design, construction, launch, and operation of such a contraption, one capable of helping us not only map out a vast array of distant phenomena that our ancestors couldn't even dream of, but to also bring us closer to understanding the underlying nature of them, as well as our universe at large. If we can understand the what, the how, and the why of our existence to such a staggering degree, should it even need to be stated how much impact the workings of the mind have on our lives? How much value and utility there is in understanding the most centrally important structure to complex life? Our phenomenology, the world as it appears before us, comes with implicit ontological assumptions that are predicated on our cognitive functions and the metabolic structure they are contained within. Our information metabolism is pre-epistemic, which means that thoughts, as they appear to our mind, have already undergone the information metabolism necessary for them to function, and that metabolism lies outside of our conscious control. In other words, we cannot change the way our brain generates thoughts, even though we may be able to change our thoughts after they've formed. The natural question that follows is, what are these preconscious processes that serve as the template of our awareness? The answer to that question requires us to look outwardly and backward, as any cognitive process is a direct reflection of the rules of reality that guided our evolution. When all is boiled down, our minds process the following concepts. Matter, represented as properties, mass, density. Energy, represented as temperature, power, motion. Space, represented as length, width, height. And time, represented as past, present, and future. This is where one of the fathers of modern psychology, Carl Jung, re-enters the picture. As mentioned in the previous video, if nothing else, Jung's greatest intellectual contribution was his distillation of the mind's workings into 4 domains: intuition, sensation, logic, and ethics. These domains represent a manageable yet exhaustive list of our mental processes, and together they are conventionally referred to as the macro elements or the Jungian faculties. These concepts tie in to the aforementioned 4 fundamental physical concepts, which is why the domain of psychological type lies at the intersection of biology, physics, and philosophy. The founder of Socionics, Oscar Augustina, united Jung's ideas into a coherent system using group theory, a field of abstract algebra, thus organizing Jung's work into a full-scale model of information metabolism. Doing so is what allows Socionics to transform Jung's basis from a loose assortment of insightful concepts into a rigorous framework that has the potential to be a powerful personal and institutional tool for furthering our understanding of the structural orientations of the mind. One of the axioms of Jungian type theory, even outside of socionics, is that the cognitive functions exist in the form of rational or irrational configurations, also referred to as judgment and perception. The former pair of terms is in line with Jung's original terminology, whereas the latter is more relevant in capturing what these terms actually describe: our awareness of information via perception, or the application of information through making decisions and engaging in purposeful activities. We can call these P and J for short. As a crash course, intuition and sensing are irrational, or P faculties. Logic and ethics are rational, or J faculties. To keep things simple, we will omit extroversion and introversion for now, and just focus on the 4 key faculties originally introduced by Jung. Alright, so what's necessary to talk about next is the concept of a dichotomy, and how yin necessitates yang. A dichotomy is a partition of a whole into 2 parts. In other words, this couple of parts must be A, jointly exhaustive, so everything must belong to one part or the other, and mutually exclusive. Nothing can belong simultaneously to both parts. Dichotomies are very important components of type theory, and their existence as a concept has immense implications for how the mind and reality work. Every action is accompanied with an equal and opposite reaction. Everything has its opposite: night and day, life and death, north and south, happiness and despair, positive and negative. An example: magnetic poles can never be distinctly isolated from one another. Doing so merely creates a new pair of opposites. It would be foolish to think this component of reality stops at the boundary of our skulls. By being something, say as in having a set of cognitive preferences, you are not being the opposite of that something, and thus it exerts an opposing force from within. Take a look at the brain itself. One can immediately notice an attribute that raises profound questions about how it works. Instead of being one unified lump of neurons, as one would expect the body's control center to be, it is instead cleaved straight down the middle, with just a small bridge of white matter connecting the two halves together. This partition doesn't represent a socionics dichotomy itself per se. The example is meant to illustrate how the brain is itself structured to process information dichotomously. The dichotomies of socionics represent complex neurological activities that emerge as the primary components of cognition that we are consciously aware of. For example, our conscious judgments can either be impersonal, pertaining to the external accuracy or internal consistency of factual information, or towards the moods, preferences, and character qualities of ourselves and other people. In order for us to deal with the emotional world of humans while also being able to work with inanimate objects in the real world, these processes must be distinct, yet connected. We cannot evaluate information both personally and impersonally at the same time. They are separate processes contained within the same apparatus. Therein lies one of the four core Jungian dichotomies and a central example of the dual nature of man. Logic versus ethics, as well as the other dichotomies in the theory, will further be expanded upon as the channel progresses. But for the sake of establishing the basics, let's dive straight into a preview of all the primary dichotomies of the socion. So first off, intuition. Think time. It is abstract, implicit perception. Intuition is an irrational faculty that at the root level forms connections between data points. These connected chunks of data form patterns of varying complexity that create our abstract perception of reality. Our imagination, our extrapolations of the unseen, our ideas, dreams, predictions, gut insights, and all other forms of non-localized information presented as a conscious experience beyond what we directly take in from the outside world. As opposed to sensation, which treats information as particle-like, unchanging, and clearly delineated, intuition is more temporal, continuous, and intangible. It augments sensation by filling in the gaps of our inevitably limited access to direct external data. Thematically, it is associated with clairvoyance, mythology, foresight, transcendence of our earthly domain, which, in unhealthy manifestations, can be delusional. In less extreme terms, it expands our awareness of reality by allowing us to conceptualize global phenomena, such as through using symbols to ascribe meaning, forecasting how things will evolve over time, combining data to generate original ideas and solutions, as well as simply being able to quickly make sense of novel experiences. Because of its seemingly magical ability to perceive what is not concretely evident in physical space, balancing intuition with sensation is crucial for it to be of any accuracy or use. Next up, sensation. Think space. It is visceral, explicit perception. Sensing, sensation, or sensorics is an irrational faculty that deals with directly informing us about what actually exists in space, both as representations and in real time. It is non-extrapolative, concrete information that is taken in through the senses. interacted with in local space, and represented to us via corresponding qualia associated with such information, such as color, sound, tactile feedback, pleasure, or pain. It is worked with at the physical level. It is discrete and externally oriented. This can manifest as detecting and overcoming obstacles, acquiring necessary resources, storing stable and crystallized impressions of objects or images, being in touch with the states or needs of our bodies, and even possessing a sense of beauty or aesthetics. As such, sensing both fuels the intuitive process with points to connect and meanings to derive, while also anchoring it to the realities of our tangible world, which aids us in actualizing our visions and preventing our intuitions from floating too far away into the void of detached fantasy and derangement. Next up, logic. Think matter. Logic, less precisely referred to as thinking in Myers-Briggs, is an unemotional faculty based in rationality and measurable variables. It focuses on usefulness and practicality instead of falling into the subjective realm. Logic makes decisions by focusing on structures and mechanics of inanimate reality. This is a long-winded way of saying that instead of good, bad, like, dislike, or happy, distraught, logic makes decisions by minimizing limbic influences and focusing on the structures and mechanics of the outer inanimate reality. It is not about our uniquely biological preferences and priorities, but rather about systemizing and deducing information impersonally. This can be anything from streamlining procedures to yield the highest proportion of output per unit of input, or using clearly codified rules and axioms to reach conclusions that consistently align with external criteria, and in accordance with the restrictions placed upon us by our reality. As such, logic is crucial in order for our values and emotions to allow us to hold personal or shared priorities that can be sustained, protected, and provided for. Without this faculty, biological entities would never be able to conduct themselves in a coherent or prosperous way. Next up, and last of the bunch, ethics. Think energy. It is visceral, implicit judgment. Ethics, also sometimes referred to as feeling, is an internal and visceral judgment faculty that deals with the intrapersonal and interpersonal domain of our emotions and relationships. Put more simply, ethics is the part of us that determines what we care about in the form of psychological closeness, passion, and emotional preferences, usually between ourselves and other people, but can sometimes even be applied to objects or ideas. Romantic attraction, familial bonds, moral alignment, feelings of belonging within a community, fervent advocacy for oneself for their group's interests, these are all examples of the emergence of ethics in human behavior. Our ability to perceive and to make logical sense of our external world would be unlikely to drive humanity towards love, procreation, affiliation, or commitment if not for our ability to attribute some magnitude of importance or significance to these distinctly biological activities. Hence why ethics are so deeply embedded into human cognition and nature in general. As with other faculties, however, ethics must be balanced in tandem with its complementary process, logic, if it is to be effectively applied. Otherwise, the limbic and unstructured nature of ethics can result in a propensity towards unreasonable, even destructive decision-making that can hinder personal or societal growth. And there you have it, the four kingdoms of the mind: intuition, sensation, logic, and ethics. These concepts have been repeated so frequently because they lie at the heart of the entire system. So understanding them will be crucial for putting all future content on this channel into context. The Jungian compass itself presents 3 of the 4 dichotomies inherent to a type's 4-letter code. The next video will introduce an additional dichotomy, which will split these 4 faculties into the 8 distinct information elements that constitute the metabolic structure of each type, and start bridging the gap with examples to illustrate how they manifest in our agendas, behaviors, and broader society. Stay tuned for more and keep your minds open.